Hello, everybody. Welcome to our May Share Your Story webinar. I'm going to give folks just a second to get logged on, and then we will get started. All right, let's go ahead and get things kicked off. Thank you guys for joining us for the Share Your Story webinar. This webinar is going to focus on digital storytelling. So we're very excited to have you here. We have a great agenda for you. But before we get started, just a couple reminders. If you have any questions for the speakers as we're going through the webinar, you can click on the Q&A box in your menu and type your question there, and we will be sure that it's directed to the speakers. If we do have any media joining us, we ask that you formally announce your participation and refrain from quoting any of the discussion during the webinar. Instead, we ask that you follow up with participants afterwards for direct quotes. We also have closed captioning available. If you're interested in using that, you can click the live transcript button at the bottom of your window. We also have Spanish translation service available. If you're interested in using that, you can click on the link that Shannon has just sent in the chat. Awesome. So this is our agenda for you today. Each of our speakers are going to cover a different kind of digital media that you can share your story through. So first with us, we have Lani Knutson from Cure CMD. And Lani writes a blog called Our Selenon Life. So Lani will be sharing with us tips and tricks for sharing your story through a blog. Next, we have the lovely Sarita Edwards with the E.WE Foundation. And Sarita is going to be talking a bit about her podcast called Being Rare. And that will help inform all of you who are interested in sharing your story through a podcast. And then, of course, last but not least, we have Cory Lewis with the Red Moon Project. And Cory's going to talk a bit to you guys about sharing your story through videography. So I'm going to go ahead and kick things over to you, Lani.
Thank you. Thanks, Caitlin, and thanks for joining us today. About 8 years ago, I started a blog. It's called Our Selenon Life, and it's been a great way to share our story, but also connect with other families in the Selenon community, but also just the rare disease community in general. And you can see some of the photos. I took these right from the blog. So the boys were pretty little when we started. Yeah, we'll go to the next slide and I'll share a little bit about why I started it. So our boys received a clinical, well, I should say our oldest son received a clinical diagnosis when he was 2.5. Our younger son, we assumed, had the same disease when he showed the same symptoms. But it wasn't until they were 8 and 5 in 2015 that we received a genetic diagnosis. This changed our care plan for them quite significantly. And so it was a lot of appointments and new specialists and getting them on BiPAP, which was crucial for their care. And so it was a long year of a lot of changes. And in that process, we also discovered Cure CMD, which is our patient organization. CMD stands for congenital muscular dystrophy, and our boys have an ultra rare form of that organization introduced us to other families who were exactly like us. With the clinical diagnosis, we were having a hard time connecting with families, but this genetic diagnosis really opened the door for that. I was a music teacher. I was teaching part-time. Teaching is not flexible when you have lots of appointments to go to, especially specialists when they tell you to show up and don't give you a choice. So I was kind of considering a career change, but mostly I was just looking for a way to process my thought about their genetic diagnosis, about all this new information we were learning, coming into this rare disease space and learning a ton from other families who had come before us. And I really also wanted to connect with other families. And so a lot of people ask me, why didn't you just journal and not put it on a blog? And really that last point is why, because I wanted it to be a place where that newly diagnosed family who started Googling would find my blog and be able to connect with me, but also then I could connect them with the broader CureCMD community. And so if you go to the next slide, I created what was our Step in One Life, but now their disease has changed names. So now we're our Selenon Life. And it was, again, just a way for me to write and think about their diagnosis, share photos, all of those things. And so the URL is still a Step in One Life, but I call it now our Selenon Life. You can go to the next slide. So this was my very first post. That's not the whole post, but that was the ending. I had gone to a conference, a teaching conference, and went to a session on resiliency in kids. And the presenter reframed my approach, I should say, to their disease and my thoughts about it, and kind of replaced my why did this happen to us? Why my sons? Why? A question we all want to know the answer to. And as probably know, there is no answer to that question, except that the genes caused it. And so she replaced that with what for. And that was also a driving factor behind starting this blog, because I needed a space to explore that question and try and figure out what purpose my life was headed in, what purpose I could bring to our advocacy community, but also just things that I could do to support my children as they went through this diagnosis and care and all of those things. And so that last, this paragraph is the last paragraph that I wrote on that first blog. And it really, really still is the why behind my creating. We can go to the next slide. So it started out as a place, again, for me to kind of just work through some of my thoughts and feelings, but it's become a lot more than that. Some topics that I've covered, anything like a current event, something big happens. We all know in the rare disease space, sometimes things happen and can change your life quite dramatically, very quickly. Mostly it was in the early days, a way to exercise my frustration, anger, my response to people who said maybe some very unhelpful things. Also, just giving people a glimpse into what it was to live with a rare disease, because a lot of times people don't really understand. I also gave life updates. Some of my posts became very existential. And it's interesting to go back and read older posts and just see how much my thinking about their diagnosis has changed, and just my views on disability and just as we've learned more about their disease, just knowing what future may hold for them. I use it as a way to bring awareness, and occasionally we will use it as a way to drive some fundraising for CureCMD. We well, pre-COVID, we held a fundraiser every year, and so it was a way to inform people about that. But then the last one was really helpful. It was a different kind of purpose, but our older son had spinal fusion surgery, very common in the neuromuscular world. And the blog was a place where I could post how things were going, and I wouldn't have to answer, 100 text messages or phone calls or, emails. Not that I didn't want that support or hear from people, but when you're in the hospital, you don't always have time. And so it was a way to daily give updates. I gave updates throughout the day when he had the surgery. And I could just send people there and say, here, this is where you're going to find information about how things. So it really started as the first two purposes, but has really developed over time. We can go to the next slide. And then once I started posting, I submitted some of my stories to the Mighty and have been posted there. Painter and Color, Source Mama found my blog and asked if I would share some of my writing. But most importantly, at least to us, is that our Cure CMD blog on our webpage will repost my blog posts that are relevant. Obviously, updates about surgeries and things like that aren't, but they use it as a way to share the perspective of a parent who is dealing with this. And I also set up a pretty basic blog platform, but I did include a contact form because I really wanted people to be able to reach out to me. And this was a way for them to get in contact with me without me having to reveal my email address. They fill out the form, and the form comes into my email. So I see it right away. I don't have to check a separate place. And then I can respond to them directly from my email, and has been a way to meet some new and not so new families in the CMD family. And the next slide. So just a few things that I would offer as advice. I think, if you want to do a blog, it can be done in a lot of different ways. There are lots of you could spend a lot of time on it. You can not, it's really yours and up to you. For me, I started creating the website and just kind of started building it slowly. I posted that first blog post and then refined some of the other parts of the blog. I didn't really tell a lot of people about it until I had maybe a couple posts on it, because I just wanted to take some time to really thoughtfully create it. There's lots of platforms that are easy to use, so you don't have to be a tech wizard. Of course, if you are, you can create your own page, but I am not, and I'm of a certain age where I probably would not have the patience to learn. So I used WordPress, but there's lots of platforms depending on what type of, what type of features you want to have and things like that. And there's lots of things online to figure out which one's best for you. For me, setting the comments for that I would need to approve them before they showed up was important, because while WordPress does filter out some of the spam, I wanted to be able to respond to people if they had a lot of feelings, or not to really manage what other people said, but just to keep the blog a positive and safe. For me, I'm a type A person, so sometimes I would get on myself for not posting for several weeks or a month or several months. That is not, that was not helpful because, of course, in rare disease, we never know exactly how much time we're going to have. But you can set goals and say, I'm going to have this many, and whatever works for you. This one is hard. Know your boundaries. So when the boys were little, I kind of posted photos of them. I talked about them a lot, but now as I've gone along, I've really tried to focus on just my response to, and they're older now, they don't want their photos out there. And so just knowing what you want to share and what you won't share is I think a good personal boundary. But you want to be authentic. You don't want to just sort of have pat answers because, as we know, there are none in the rare disease space. And so just speaking from your heart is important. I joined a writing circle that meets monthly. And so sometimes I'll write a blog post and they'll give feedback to me. And then after they give that feedback, I post it on my blog. And then I don't do a lot of social media sharing, but I do share when I have new posts. Again, I don't have a lot of time to do that kind of thing, but you could really expand on that if you wanted. Again, I do it for other people, but really it's for me and my journey as a parent and trying to work through this very complicated. I've put my email address there. I work with CureCMD, so I have a CureCMD address. Feel free to email questions at any point. I'm always happy to chat about it. And I don't know if I should answer the questions now or if we should wait on that. So I'll defer to Caitlin.
Beautiful. Thank you so much, Lani. We will cover questions at the end. But thank you so much for sharing all your insights and advice. And we definitely have some good questions for you in a bit. Awesome. I am going to turn things over to Sarita Edwards to talk to you all about sharing your story through a podcast.
Awesome. Thank you, Caitlin. Hello to everyone. So I'm just going to take a few minutes to talk about digital storytelling, specifically about sharing your story on a podcast. Next slide, please. So first things first, I am Sarita Edwards. I am a parent advocate. My husband and I, we have 5 children. Our youngest, Elijah, was diagnosed in utero with a rare disease called trisomy 18. That's what pushed me into advocacy and public policy, into starting a foundation and into starting a podcast. I currently serve as CEO and president of the E.WE Foundation. We are a global healthcare organization that provides resources and support to families with trisomy 18 and other rare diseases. And I am the host of the Being Rare podcast. The podcast is an online community of rare disease conversations. We offer insight, perspective, and positive reinforcement. Making the decision to share our story was not easy. When we first started our journey, I was very overwhelmed. And a lot of the stories that I heard about families navigating our son's diagnosis, they were not very pleasant. Conversations about the difficulty of this life, they really did outweigh conversations about the joy that you could pull from it. So in 2019, we started the foundation to bridge the gap between receiving a life-limiting diagnosis and how the healthcare system chooses to respond. And in 2021, I started the Being Rare podcast. Next slide, please. So starting a podcast, it fell into my mind in probably 2020, but it wasn't until 2021 that I actually recorded my first episode. The Being Rare podcast, we're not just a podcast, we're more of a talk radio style platform where we have intimate and sometimes difficult conversations about navigating life with a rare disease. We also talk about issues that impact the rare disease community. There are a couple of reasons why I started the podcast. I wanted to share our experiences on my terms. For me, that means sharing the good and the not so good. I wanted to highlight really great experiences and encounters that we were told not to expect, interactions with people in the community. I also wanted to dismantle the narrative that trisomy 18 is incompatible with life and that our children are vegetative and not worth the medical resources. I wanted to talk about the challenges that we face with the healthcare system, and I didn't want to be censored. It's important to me to talk about the impact of receiving our son's diagnosis and not feel judged. And I wanted to do that through my own voice. Sometimes I do still feel judged, but we'll talk about that on the podcast too. I also wanted to talk about issues like newborn screening, Medicaid expansion, access to genetic counselors, all the things that impact the rare disease community. And we have been directly impacted as a family on our rare disease journey. So my inspiration for the show is really about having something to say and being able to say it as boldly as I want to. Next slide, please. So sharing our story really starts with thinking about what I want to share on the show and what I want our listeners to take away from it. I do give a lot of thought to how I approach conversations because it is important to me to be genuine and authentic. I don't want to approach conversations negatively, but I do want to speak my truth. I think, sharing my perspective, it's important that my intentions are good. And so I do consider if I'm sharing something about my kids, because my daughter has friends who, may listen to the show. And if I'm talking about, something related to like my extended family, I do strongly consider how those things may come across in a podcast episode. I don't want anyone embarrassed by anything that I've said, even if it is a truth and a fact. A couple of quick examples that I wanted to kind of highlight is a few months ago, there was some misinformation circulating about the trisomy 18 diagnosis and its impact on the pregnant mom. And several people reached out to me about that misinformation. As an organization, we did put out an official statement, but every person that wanted to be on my show, I told no. And I told them no because it was very clear to me that they wanted to tear down the mother and not the misinformation. And so I declined to have guests speak about that at that time. And so when I did decide to approach this, as a conversation on the show, I called out the misinformation. I highlighted our experience and how we were given that same misinformation. And then I brought in the medical expertise of a prenatal genetic counselor to kind of support the narrative that I wanted to convey. And so I do really give a lot of thought to how we have conversations on the Being Rare podcast. Another quick example is, if I'm talking about a travel experience or something that, directly impacts the dynamic of the entire family, like navigating the holidays, I may pull my husband into those conversations so he can share his perspective. I do think that it's important that our listeners hear, what I think about a certain topic or what, and what he thinks about a certain topic because our ideas may be different. And so when I consider the methods for formatting the show, I do lean on what I'm sharing and what I want our listeners to walk away with from the episode. Next slide. So crafting a great episode, it really starts with using engaging language and storytelling techniques to captivate the audience. And so my first 2 years as a podcaster, full disclosure, I was bored with my own show. I felt like it was another podcast that no one was listening to. I examined what I was doing and it was all interview style, which was not fun for me. I didn't want stuffy conversations or have to find a guest to be on the show and then learn about them so I know the right questions to ask. I just wanted raw, unedited, unscripted conversations with real people who didn't mind sharing their truth. I also wanted to be comfortable not having a guest and just speaking my own truth. And so even if that was just for like 1 or 2 minutes, and that's how 1 Minute Mondays were born. Next slide, please. So 1 Minute Mondays is a short bite-sized mini episode about absolutely anything. And we do have extended episodes where we talk with our guests and who I call co-hosts, where we talk with our co-hosts, but we gained our popularity from our 1 minute episodes. It can be anything that we've navigated as a family, or it could be something that stemmed from a conversation with a colleague or a friend. I came up with this idea because I know folks don't always have 30 minutes to an hour to listen to a full episode. And, statistically, if people start listening and they stop, the chances of them returning is very, very slim. And so I wanted to figure out a way to capture people. And so 1 Minute Mondays was a fun way to do that. Sometimes I will use 1 Minute Mondays to highlight something from a more extended episode. And it does help draw traffic to that episode once it airs. And so that's the whole premise behind 1 Minute Mondays. We gained a lot of popularity for it. I get a lot of feedback about it. And so we're super, super excited to put it back in rotation on the Vanguard podcast for this season. Next slide, please. So if you are thinking about hosting a podcast, I say go for it. There is no such thing as too many podcasts or too many conversations. I would say if there is a podcast that you enjoy listening to, or you like their particular format, mirror that to the conversations that you want to have. I would say, make sure your story is your story. I say that because sometimes people's storytelling is what they've heard other people say. And so you don't want to build content from someone else's narrative. You want your experiences, your opinion, your perspective. I would say consider the scope and depth of your topic. Do you want to share your story and maybe have other people share their story? Will your questions be pretty standard, or would you use the same talk track every time? Or will conversations be topic specific and your questions change from episode to episode? Whatever you decide, make sure it's suitable for your podcast and the audience you hope to reach. If you want it to be an open-ended to anyone type podcast, or will you target, patients or caregivers or healthcare professionals, legislators, all the people, the stakeholders that we touch in the rare disease community? I will say we talk about absolutely everything. I'd like to say that we are an open book. I share whatever I want to share about our family. And my family knows that I may talk about them on air. And so far, it's not been a problem for anyone. And I laugh as I say that because I hope I don't have anything out there that's offended anybody. Nobody has said anything to me. But lastly, I would say, make changes to improve your content or delivery. Remove the idea that your podcast has to look like a podcast that's already circulating. Create your own brand. And for me, that meant starting one way, assessing that I didn't like that format for myself, and then I changed the way that I was doing things to something completely different. Next slide. So if you are not interested in starting a podcast, but you would love to share your story on someone's show, again, I start off by saying, make sure your story is your story. And I say that here because to the host of the show, when a co-host or a guest, when they do a lot of, I heard someone say, oh, and I heard someone say, to the host, it becomes, well, I should have invited them on the show. And so I say, if you want to be a guest on the show, make sure you're still sharing your story. Pull in examples as you need to, but make sure the premise of your conversation is something you have been a part of, something that you have experienced. You can ask to be on someone's show, but make sure their show aligns with the conversation that you want to have. I think if you're looking to just share your story, maybe seek out an interview style podcast. But if you're talking about specific experiences, maybe seek out, somebody like the Being Where podcast, where we're kind of topic centered podcast. So for example, I get messages often from people wanting to be on the show. And if I get a message that says, I love to share my story on your podcast. I have a son with trisomy 18 who's headed to 2nd grade next school year. I'd love to share our journey. That's great, but that's a lot of investigative work for me on the forefront. And so a lot of the questions that I might ask them on the show, I have to ask them ahead of time to see if they're a good fit for a specific topic, right? But if you were to reach out and say, hey, I'd love to be, on your show, I'd love to share my story. I have a son with trisomy 18. We got our diagnosis in utero. He's headed to 2nd grade in our public school system where he receives special education services. He's doing really, really well. We use a wheelchair and a gait trainer for mobility. So from that inquiry about being a guest, I can pull so many different topics that I could potentially invite you to be a part of, from mobility to navigating the school system to getting your diagnosis in utero and how was that experience for you. And so for me as a podcaster, I didn't want to know everything before we jumped into the conversation. I wanted to get it raw and organically as we talk truly for the first time. We may have some dialogue ahead of time, but for the actual recording of the show, I want to be wild and caught off guard so my responses can be just genuine and authentic in that moment. Communicate if something is off limits, if there's something in your journey that you guys have talked about or you don't want to talk about on air. Make sure the podcaster knows that ahead of time. Be ready to answer questions and engage. If you ask to be a guest on the show, the expectation is you're going to bring conversation. And so I would say, just make sure the podcaster knows. I try to ask those questions when I bring co-hosts on Being Rare. Is anything off limits? Is there anything that you don't want me to ask? And I also, try to make sure I create the safe space so they trust me with their information and they know that that anything I ask is because I believe someone in the listening audience will want to know. And so I think all of that is really, really important. Next slide, please. My formatting looks a little off on this one. So just a really, really quick reminder. Above everything, whether you're a host or a guest or co-host on a show, be creative, have fun, and practice active listening to enhance your experience. Sharing our stories are really just that. Like, these are our stories that we have decided to share publicly. I love listening to Lani when she was talking about her blog and people asking, could you just journal? You do what's best for you. That's something that I always believe in. And if it's sharing publicly, I support that and say, go for it. Share as much or as little as you want to share, and do it in a way that's comfortable for you. So just always remember, wherever you find yourself on sharing your story, don't create an uncomfortable, unsafe environment for yourself. It's your story. Share it how you want to. Last slide, I just wanted to say thank you so much for allowing me to be a part of the conversation. And as I say at the close of all of our shows, if you're not following the Being Rare podcast, What are you waiting on? You can find Being Rare wherever you stream your traditional podcast. You can find live recordings on our YouTube channel. You can follow us on social media at Being Rare Podcast. You can find me, Sarita Edwards, at Sarita Edwards on most social media platforms. Find us on Spotify, Apple, or anywhere else you stream. Until the next episode, be rare. Thank you so much, Caitlin, for letting me be a part.
Thank you so much, Sarita. This has been so insightful. And I'm excited to ask you some more questions here in a second. Until then, I am going to turn things over to the lovely Cory Lewis to talk to us a little bit more about the Red Moon Project.
Awesome. Thank you so much, Caitlin. I appreciate everyone joining us today. Thanks for being here. My name is Cory.
Hey, Cory. I'm sorry. We're having just a little bit of a hard time hearing you.
So sorry about that. Can you hear me now? Can you hear me clearly?
It sounds kind of muffled.
Okay, can you hear me?
Perfect. Thank you.
Awesome. I'm sorry for the audio issues, everyone. My name is Cory Lewis. I am the founder of Red Moon Project, and I have been doing my advocacy in the rare disease space through media and film. Just to give you a little background before we jump in, I am a sickle cell warrior. I have sickle cell SC. I was born with it, and I feel like I've had more issues as a child growing up with sickle cell. So it definitely kind of built me to be a pretty strong person as I got into my older years, going into my 20s. I just kind of knew how to, handle different situations when it came to my sickle cell. So let's go to the next slide. I can give you a little background of why I wanted to share my story through videography. Moving to Atlanta was my intro to film and media production. Surprisingly, I was doing a lot of small gigs back in 2013 with media and production in Atlanta. As you can see, we have Orange is the New Black, Orange is the New Black cast. You have Monique, Love and Hip Hop, Bravo TV's Married to Medicine. I did a lot of stuff. And I think that also was the impact of me having a lot of symptoms going on with my sickle cell, because I just did not know how to sit down. And that was my problem. And I think I needed to just kind of focus on like, okay, I'm having these issues. I want to keep, doing things, but am I reverting back from not paying attention to my own pain? So just sitting under, the stars at night and just brainstorming. I don't know what it was, but I just had this epiphany about Red Moon Project. And I just kind of put my blood cells turning into sickle shade with the crescent of the moon. And I just thought about like the phases and everything, what was happening with me in my life, trying to just maneuver everything, not having the best support, but still making sure that I'm looking and, seeking for support. And this all really put me into the works of starting Red Moon Project, because I've been doing this since 2011 and brainstorming and planning on how can I do my own, business to like advocate for others and share this story of what I'm going through. We can move to the next slide. So this kind of really pushed me, going through high school. It started off as the Alan D. Lewis Sickle Cell Foundation, then it changed to a different name. I changed the logo so many times. Once I got to 2019 and I started to actually take the action to look for, other mentors and look for people who could actually give me some guidance. This was an opportunity when I was able to meet my pillar, Dan. She is with My Three Sicklers, and she's a wonderful, wonderful mentor. She also helps a lot of the youth that have sickle cell in the state of Georgia. She gave me a lot of different tips and tricks on what I could do, and that's where Red Moon was established on June 5th, 2019. Our mission is to restore wellness, elevate quality of life, and develop meaningful connections. And like I said before, we want to phase the pain like we face like the phases of the moon. And I feel like when we get that full moon, it's like, you get back to your fullness, you're back to where you can, really function and function healthy. But when we get into those crescent moons and when we get into those other parts of the phases, I feel like that's when people really start to figure out their diagnosis journey. They start to figure out their advocacy journey. They're starting to figure out a lot of different complications that we as, rare disease, we deal with in the hospital, or different discriminations. So I just felt like that was the best time for me to start being proactive and starting to learn more. My first sickle cell event was in San Diego. It was at the Cayenne Wellness Education Symposium, and I'm telling you, it was so good. That was like the best way to jump into advocacy with the entire community, with the pharmaceutical companies. Like, it was just so many people that I had no idea that was there. And I think that right there was like my drive. That was my drive. I seen it, and I think I got enough where it was like, I'm ready. Like, I'm ready to do this. So I found a team. I found somebody to kind of help me get it off the ground. As you can see, our pictures at the top. And Ashley was my mentor. Ashley Valentine was like the best mentor, because sickle cell, they kind of had the same message that I wanted, but hers was more focused on storytelling and seeing how we can do policy change. That right there was like a light bulb, because I had no idea. And I mean, coming from the Black community, sometimes we get the information a little later. And I didn't really focus too much on policy before getting into this. So when Ashley kind of described more of that to me, that's when I was able to connect with Every Life Foundation. And I'm telling you guys, that was like the best time for me. Even though COVID was around that time, having Ashley and Every Life Foundation, that was giving me the tools, and it actually put me in a really good position to like really help other people start the advocacy journey too. We can move to the next. All right, so sharing your story, social media and mass media. I got so intertwined with getting on camera and showing just telling people my story, and also advocating what I wanted to do with Red Moon. I did not realize how much I was being put on the internet. Like, I had no idea. And the first thing that started it off was my COVID vaccine documentary on YouTube. It's not like, I don't have a whole bunch of views, but that was like a really vulnerable moment for me, because I did not know how people would look at it. I didn't know what people would say. Taking my camera everywhere, I'm recording these people giving me the shot. I'm telling people how I'm feeling after. Like, I was very vulnerable, and I'm putting this stuff out on camera. So I didn't know where that was gonna go. I had no idea, but it actually kind of helped me, because people started to hear my story more. And I got into these blogs, I got into different things where it was like, we want to hear your story. So I started to do weekly IG lives, and it was called the Warrior Roll Call. And you can see on the right, I started talking to some warriors in the Middle East. I started talking to warriors in the UK. I started talking to people all around the world, because I wanted to hear, we share the same disease, but what are you doing on your side of the world? How are you guys handling things? And I really felt like that was a big eye opener for me, because I also had to kind of understand, like, expressing feelings through social media, and how much emotion could come out of asking some of those questions. Even with Zachariah in the Middle East, some of those conversations it got deep. So being mindful of how much is being shared, that was something that I also had to learn. But as you guys can see, I've been in quite a few things, from going into social media and it's being produced through mass media. So there's a big difference with sharing your story on social media and mass media, and we'll talk more into it. But I just wanted to give you guys a little gist of just the difference, and how you can start off on social media and really grow to a bigger platform. You go to the next slide. So right now, currently, I'm working with snow companies. We really elevate the ambassador voice. That's pretty much where we come from with snow companies, and we like to take pharmaceutical companies and bring in the patient ambassador voice, and we try to focus on compliance and authenticity, because even though pharmaceutical companies want, they want people to engage, we still need the patient voice to really make it grow. When we don't have the authenticity, it makes it just go ahead and put it to the side. So sharing your story through film production is another way of really getting people pulled in and also showing your product and marketing, with marketing and story, really. Curating your story with a writer, this is a bigger part that I actually really enjoy when you do film production, sharing your story, because you actually sit down with someone who can actually guide you and give you a little bit more oomph to your story, because I feel like a lot of times, sometimes, like Sarita said, you hear other people's story, you start saying other folks' story. And that's why it's very important to focus on what you're saying on camera and why you're saying it. But film production is a better way because you have guidance and you have someone to really help you out. So preparing for those long days, you're doing a lot of wardrobe changes, a lot of multiple takes. You do have a few breaks, but because there's so much going on in that space, you need to stay hydrated. You need to make sure you're just communicating whatever accommodation is that you need. Because I know that was a big thing when I started with Bluebird Bio. When I went to LA for that one, that was a new scenery for me. And it definitely was not something I was expecting, but enjoying those perks of the production, I felt like I was really spoiled. I felt like I was like, y'all doing too much, stop, slow down. But enjoy those travel logistics, enjoy the food, enjoy the fun. Film production may not be everyone's first way of sharing your story, but if you share your story and it's so in depth to someone and they feel like they need to, hey, let's get deeper into this. Film production is a really good way to get it out there. We move to the next slide. So to summarize everything, it really was good to hear Lani and Sarita kind of discuss more on blogs and podcasting, because this will kind of bring us into mass media, social media, and what those entail. Sharing on social media can be managed and controlled by you. And like Lani said before, she had to approve some of those comments before they came into the chat. Or when Sarita would kind of do a soft screen or a heat check, a tip check, just to make sure you good for this one. That is more manageable. When you are doing stuff on mass media, when it comes to the news crews, when it comes to different interviews right on the spot, a lot of the time that stuff is not managed by you. You cannot control that information, and that's why it's very, very important to figure out when is the best time to share your story. Practice first. I've had a lot of times where I would feel like I need to vent. And if I can't vent to everybody at that time, pull your phone out. Take a journal. Or even if you just recording your voice, you want to practice and really feel confident in your words and understand how your message and just be thoughtful of that message. Because you just want to think about what you are saying to people, and is it making sense to folks? Are they resonating with this with you? Because media is everywhere. I mean, we live in a world now where technology is so full. It's cameras everywhere. People are always recording. So you always want to just be mindful. Exploring what platform you can do best to enhance your message. That's also a really good way to figure out how you can impact your advocacy journey and also anyone else's advocacy journey, because that's one thing that I feel like really boost me and kind of help others. I got out there and I really wanted to show people about advocacy because I had no idea what advocacy was until I got to the right people. Finding who your audience is, I also took that to be a big thing, because like I said, when I did my YouTube, I didn't have a lot of views, which is fine. But when you are trying to get your story out there, and some folks really do have a mission to get out there, you want to find who your audience is, because if no one's listening to you, you really are just putting a lot of stuff on the internet that you probably could just keep for yourself. And I have books and journals and all types of stuff everywhere where there's so many stories that I could just tell, but sometimes it's okay to keep it to yourself. If you want to be this renowned book author who's writing so many books later down the road, do that. Save some of that information and just understand why your story matters. Identify what resonates with your audience as well, because you want to know how your rare disease journey aligns with other folks. I know with me, I'm not the most, orthodox sickle cell warrior. I don't go to, blood transfusions all the time. I'm not always in the ER. I'm pretty good when it comes to stuff like that. But I also want to make sure that I'm not leaving out my warrior friends either, because if they experience this stuff and I don't, that doesn't mean that I can't validate what they go through. That's something I need to make sure I'm being mindful about. But to end all of this, I just want to make sure you guys are just making the best impact when you are putting your story out on any social media platform, any mass media platform, especially when it comes to videos. You know, you always want to overly engage with the supporting audience who are actually there looking out to hear you. And any media outlets that want to hear from you, engage with these folks and see what you can do to, you know, really keep your advocacy journey where you want it to be. And practice your storytelling with a short video or recording, like I said in the beginning, because it's always great to get criticism for your friends. And I am going to digress because I know we got 10 more minutes, but you can move it to the last slide. And if you guys want to contact me, please feel free to reach me on my email. You can go onto our website. Advocacy is defined as the action that speaks in favor or recommend, or speak in favor of, recommends, argues for a cause or support or defend. So I want you guys to always remember your advocacy journey is very, very important, and everyone learns at a different point. So we're all here to help each other.
Absolutely. Thank you so much, Cory, for sharing all of your insights as well. I'm going to move us into questions. If you have any questions you haven't entered into the Q&A box, feel free to go ahead and do so. But I am going to start with Lani with a quick question for you. Lani, how have you found is the most effective way to share or promote your blog?
I think, as I said before, I posted on my personal Facebook page. I did create a Facebook page for the blog. Again, I'm over 40, so I'm not super savvy about that, but I do use that as a platform, but also just word of mouth. And then through the reposting of my blog posts, they always credit it back to my original. So I think my goal wasn't to get it to everyone. So I promote it as much as I feel like I have time for, honestly.
No, that's great. Thank you. And Sarita, I love that during your presentation, you mentioned positive reinforcement and trying to keep your message positive and uplifting to your audience. Can you talk a little bit about how folks can, you know, intentionally be more positive or have positive reinforcement when sharing their story?
Oh yeah. You know, I think it's important to, and I think we've all touched on just being authentic and genuine, but I think you have to consider, even if you're trying to combat a different narrative, right? Like I think you can still do it in a positive way. So it doesn't look like an attack, or it doesn't look like, you know, you're complaining or being a whiner. Because, you know, I think it becomes nobody wants to listen to that. You know what I mean? Like you may get some traffic because people are looking for drama, or they're looking to share what you've said because you attacked someone, but who wants the negative energy, right? Like I think it's really just about intention. And I think when we approach conversations with good intentions, even if negative outcomes come from it, you know, somebody still wants to attack something you've said, I think you're in a better position to address it positively still, because of how you approached it in the forefront. And so I think it's all about intention and knowing that, you know, this may ruffle some feathers, but I'm going to present it positively, highlighting that this is my opinion, this is what I think about it, this is my perspective. And if you've got facts or statistics or, you know, stories that you can use to help build the narrative that you want to present, I think you do that too. And so for me, it's just about being genuinely intentional about getting your message out in a positive light. Like you want to be viewed as a positive person, and And even when we deal with negative conversations, I think there's always opportunity to still have, just a positive light on it. So that's what I think. It's just about your intention.
Awesome. Thank you, Sarita. And this is both a question for Lani and Sarita. Through your podcast or your blog, you're sharing your personal experiences and your family's experiences. And so how do you develop or refine topics that you are sharing with your audience?
I think at first it was like throwing spaghetti at the wall. I just had lots of thoughts and just wanted to get it all out. But now I'm much more thoughtful. I really stick with maybe a current event that's happening in our lives. For example, we're thinking about college for our older son. So my last blog post was about that. But it was from my perspective. It was not from his, because that's his story. That's not mine to tell. I think I try to frame it in a way that, or pick topics that will educate, but also share what it's like with children with a rare disease.
Yeah, and I'll say, kind of the same thing. Like I when I'm thinking about a topic, I try to think about like what's happening, like what's going on in our rare disease world right now. And I think about the entire family dynamic. A lot of times, I think when I first got started, in that board season for me, I was trying to focus everything on our journey with Elijah. And, he's my child with the rare disease. But then I had to realize that, Elijah's diagnosis, it impacts the entire family. And so even, today's story, it may be, about my daughter graduating graduating high school and heading to college. And so that may be a conversation that we talk about, because there's still impact there with our rare disease journey, right? Like we're losing the help that she had when, helping us navigate Elijah. We can have her, hands-on, and we won't have that. And so I think about what's happening overall as a family. If we're experiencing, Elijah got fitted for a new device or something, that could be something that we talk about. And so I just kind of assess, what do we have going on? And I'll even say on an episode, if we don't have anything going on, because I don't like to always repeat something that I've already shared, unless there's something new, with it. Like when you read a book, you see something that you didn't see the first time. And so I try to not be redundant, but if there's nothing going on, that's what I'll say. I don't have a lot today. This is where we are. This is what's happening. And that may be a super, super quick episode, because no sense in drawing it out if there's nothing happening right now. So I just assess what's happening.
Perfect. Thank you both for that insight. And Cory, I have a question for you. In your presentation, you talked about how finding a mentor was really instrumental in helping you kind of refine your Red Moon project and what you wanted to do with that. And so can you share a little bit with folks about, how to find a mentor, identify a mentor, and the importance of that?
Yeah, I think that is like really one of the biggest parts of advocacy. I think that will be so helpful for anyone who's starting it, is finding that mentor. And sometimes it could be in your backyard, it could be right next door. My pillar, she was in a different county, but she was not far. And like that was someone who I saw very active in the community. And she wasn't with a huge foundation. She had her own foundation. So just doing a lot of your research and really starting where you are in local, because I feel like that's probably the best way to do it. Because then you have a team, you have someone who can kind of guide you and put you in the right direction. And it's so great, because even though my pillar was the one who started me off, once I got over to San Diego and started to, do some more research and trying to find more answers, I started to meet more people. And I think that was like that started off right there. You know, once I got into Six Sales and I started to do more fellowships and internships, it just gave me that insight that I need to start looking at my niche, because now that I'm finding all of these these different resources and people are telling me, okay, this is what you can do, this is how you can do it as well. That part I think was the biggest thing. So finding your niche, but also having that mentor who's been in the advocacy field for a while, it'll really lead you in the right area.
Awesome. Thank you so much, all of you, for being here and sharing your insights and sharing creative ways for folks to share their rare disease stories and experiences. We appreciate each of you. Just quickly before we log off, I want to flag a couple of opportunities that are coming up for you to share your story. The first is our Youth and Teen Advocacy Day, and this is an event for 10 to 18-year-olds. We will work with them to train them prior to June 18th, and then on June 18th, they will do virtual meetings with their members of Congress. So if you know any youth and teen ages 10 to 18, encourage them to register to participate before registration closes next Friday. And then, of course, we have Rare Across America coming up in August. Registration just opened this week and will remain open until July 12th. If you're not familiar with Rare Across America, this is a event where you can meet with your members close to home. So all meetings with senators will be held virtually, and then your meetings with your representatives will be in person at their in-state and district office. So this is going to be the office in your district close to you. You don't have to go all the way to DC to meet with them. And so this is a great way to meet with your member and share your story close to home. So encourage you all to check both of these out. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out. And of course, let's stay connected. We encourage you guys to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, LinkedIn. This is where we share everything that's going on within the foundation. So if you're looking for ways to plug in and get involved, definitely encourage you to follow these Instagram and Facebook, Twitter accounts. And then, of course, last but not least, a huge thank you to today's webinar sponsors for making this webinar possible. And I want to give one last shout out before we log off to Cory, Lani, and Sarita. Thank you three again for being here and sharing your expertise with us all. And I hope to see you all in August for Rare Across America.
Thank you so much, Every Life. I appreciate you guys.
We
Yeah,
appreciate
thank you.
you.